Hello, everybody. I'm Rabbi Miriam Phillips, known as Rabbi Miriam. We are here today talking about Va'era and the series Stories of Our People. And I'm joined by a colleague who we've never met in person before, Rabbi Fischer.
And this is great, getting to meet you, Rabbi Miriam, because we still haven't met in person. But but at least now I know that even though I'm shaping up in a rectangular type box, I'm really not a square, and neither are you. And we're just two members of the, rabbinic Brady Bunch here. The first chance we've had to meet, and I'm really thrilled to have this opportunity. It's my first time on Sifrei Yahm, the stories of our people, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about this week's Torah portion, Va'era.
I always love to talk about Torah, any excuse to meet a colleague is fantastic. I joined this community just before COVID hit, so there's many colleagues I have not yet met. And I understand that we are also coughing buddies this morning, although neither of us have COVID.
It's an unusual kind of thing, but I have a little bit of a lung issue. So if I cough once or twice here and there, not COVID. It's like a special thing. It kind of makes me more like a prophet. Long before people anticipated COVID, I was there, and there you go. You've got it as well. In fact, if you like, Rabbi Miriam, we could even cough into our arms as though we're actually preventing germs from transmitting through the Zoom, camera. So we'll see how it goes.
We could even probably do a synchronized cough right now if we want.
Anytime, just let me know. In fact, I've even got a coffee with me, so we can cough.
I think we can rename this morning, instead of Sifrei Yameinu, we can call it Cough, Coffee, and Commentary.
I like that very much. Or Carefree Coffee. If we want to really get alliterative here. Or just have a kerfuffle, and we can just start with that.
So do you have a kerfuffle to start with? What are you exploring about for Va'era to teach?
Here's what I love to talk about when Va'era comes up. The first Torah, Aliyah, the first part of the portion, God speaks to Moshe. I use, by the way, I don't use the King James Version names of like Isaac. I'll say Yitzchak. I'll say Moshe instead of Moses. I like to call the people by their actual names. And God says to Moshe that I'd like you to go to the Jewish people, the slaves now in Egypt, who are just buried under their oppression. And I want you to tell them I've heard their cries, and it's time for action. We're going to get them out of here. And God uses 4 verbs. He speaks about the, excuse me, that's not the long one. That's the one that I need some liquid.
So 4 verbs in that command.
He says, v'hotzeti, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. That is to say, in 4 separate sentences, God says to Moshe, you go and tell the Jews, I'm going to v'hotzeti, I'm going to take them out of here. V'hitzalti, I'm going to save them. And v'lakachti, I'm going to carry them out. V'ga'alti, I will redeem them. It doesn't simply say those 4 verbs rat-tat-tat-tat, rather 4 sentences, each beginning with a verb. The rabbis look at those 4 verbs and point out that they actually kind of convey 4 dimensions of how God is going to take the Jews out of Egypt. And in memory of and in honor of the 4 dimensions by which God took us out, that is the reason that we drink 4 cups of wine at the Haggadah Seder when we commemorate exactly this, the redemption from Egypt. And there's an interesting little footnote to it. If you keep reading, there's a 5th verb in the 5th consecutive sentence. Not only will God, v'hotzeti v'hitzalti, v'lakachti v'ga'alti, not only will God take us out and save us and pull us out and redeem us. But then he says, Veheveti, and I will bring you into the promised land. And a new debate begins, because rabbis debate, as you and I probably are bursting to do in a moment. And in that debate, the question becomes, he's got 4 ways he's going to get us out of Egypt, and he's going to bring us into the promised land. Is the bringing into the promised land part of the Exodus? That is to say, if you're taking slaves out of Egypt and just dumping them off at a way station in the middle of the Sinai desert, have you done them a big favor? They're all going to die in the desert. What's the point if they have nowhere to go? So isn't bringing the Jews not only out of the desert, but into the promised land, isn't that 5th step part of this whole thingy? Or do we say, going from Egypt and into Israel, yeah, it's all connected, but tonight, the Seder night of Passover, tonight we're only focusing on getting out. And we'll have another holiday. Over the course of 2,000 years, we eventually named it Yom HaAtzmaut. We'll have an Independence Day for Israel. That'll be the day we focus on getting in. And so a debate ensued. Should we have 4 cups of wine for the 4 verbs of getting out of Egypt? Or should we have 5 cups of wine at the Seder? Because you need to have a place to get into as part of the completion of the Exodus. And what was the compromise? The compromise was we drink 4 cups of wine, and not certain whether we need to have a 5th cup of wine, let's pour a 5th cup of wine that we will not drink, but simply will leave on the table. And if I could just go on another moment, Rabbi Miriam, because I'm not going to just go on and on and on, but I'm just to wrap this point. That ties in over the course of the next 2,000 years with a completely unrelated storyline, and they somehow end up getting convoluted. The unrelated storyline becomes the Eliyahu story. Because as you know by now from where I'm going with this, Parashat Va'era is really the parsha that's the foundation of the April Haggadah Seder. And the story of Eliyahu is like a story, Elijah the prophet. He interfaces with the Seder in various ways that I won't get into now because let's go on too long. But the bottom line is we have a tradition that Eliyahu, he wasn't sure about what's with the Jews right now. He was the prophet in the northern kingdom of the 10 tribes at a time of King Ahab, and the wife Jezebel. Jezebel and Achav were bad people. And Eliyahu actually fled for his life. He was wanted dead or alive. And he fled all the way from the northern kingdom way down south to Mount Sinai. A whole another story for another time, around chapter 25 or so in 1 Kings, Melachim Aleph. And there developed a tradition that Eliyahu is going to be the herald when the Messiah, Mashiach, comes. And somehow he became kind of connected into the Haggadah story. And he became a quasi kind of Santa Claus. Sort of, he's not really coming to everybody's house. There's no tradition of him being a heavy drinker. It's not like Uncle Seamus from Belfast or Dublin, who would never miss a Seder without stopping off at least at 14 million Jewish homes and taking a shot of schnapps. It's just not, he's not associated with drinking. But the tradition came that he stops off at every Seder. And because we already had, from what I was saying a few moments ago, that debate that saw a question about whether we need a 5th cup, where we all agree we're going to drink 4 cups and we don't know what to do, so we'll just pour a 5th cup and we won't drink it. It got merged in with the Eliyahu story. You got the cup of wine. You got Eliyahu. What's he doing if he's not coming for sponge cake? And after all, it's a Seder. So you're not going to have sponge cake. And the tradition became, he comes and he takes a sip of wine. And that's how those two stories merged. So the next thing you know is, of course, to wrap it up for now, and I apologize if I went on a little longer than expected, but it all comes down to Barbara Beal. I was a 5-year-old boy, and we were next door neighbors to the Beals. And it was my job as the youngest kid at the table. One Passover, Mommy and Daddy said, David, which is what they called me in the days before I went by Dove, David, would you like to open the door for Eliyahu at the end of the Seder? And I said, no, because it's a ghost, and I was afraid of ghosts. And I didn't believe that ghosts are good like Casper, the friendly ghost. I knew that's just a setup to get me. So I said, I don't want to go to the Seder. I don't want to go to the door. So let someone else go to the door. And my parents were adamant. You're a 5-year-old boy. It's time to grow up. The goat, it's not a ghost. It's Eliyahu. Just open the door, let him in, or we'll never get done. So I walked over to the door with great trepidation to open it up for Eliyahu. And as I opened up the door, just at that very, very moment, our next door neighbor, Barbara Beal, had come over to our house because they had unexpectedly run short on wine, and she wanted to borrow some wine. And just at that moment, she was knocking on the door. And as she was about to knock on the door, I opened it and got a fist in my face. So I have a particular warm memory of Eliyahu coming for wine. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
A fantastic story. I think those 5 words of redemption that all have a different nuance to what it means to be redeemed, I would include bringing us into the land of Israel as part of that redemption. It seems to me that we should be including those 5 verbs as a bulk, right? However, we have those 4 children. There's a pattern of 4 in the Seder that I think is really powerful. And 4 is a number that appears sometimes associated. Like we also have the 4 species on Sukkot, but it is not the most common of our holy numbers. We get 10, we get 1, we get 7, but 4 is unusual. And I would guess, knowing our rabbis, that pull of the four times that we're supposed to teach our children, 3 of which appear in next week's Torah portion, right? That probably had a pull on redemption, which is incomplete in the Seder, right? We celebrate making it out of Egypt, but we're not yet celebrating receiving the Torah, and we're not yet celebrating arriving in the land of land of Israel. And we end with next year in Jerusalem. And that idea of incomplete redemption that becomes tied in with hospitality, with providing wine to your neighbor, Barbara, right? To welcoming redemption, the herald of redemption, Eliyahu, with wine, with that value, precious, sacred, everyday drink. I mean, that's so powerful. And it's such a contrast to how the Israelites were treated in the land of Egypt. I mean, there's such powerful messages in the contrast of enslaving the stranger versus welcoming the stranger. And of course, that's the lesson we take from the Exodus. Is one of the main lessons that we get hit over the head with during the Seder. You should welcome the stranger. You should feed the hungry, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And how cool to have that story of your neighbor knocking on your face to ask for wine. I mean, what a lesson, what a message of serendipity that is not quite serendipity, right? That's quite a story. So it's hard to follow that, Rabbi Fischer. So that's quite a Seder. We tell stories. It's really in the stories that we learn the messages.
And I'll tell you, Rabbi Miriam, I think one of the things that has been so saddening about the COVID experience is that for people like you and me, who really are built around having guests, telling our stories, inviting people to our homes, interfacing, and especially Shabbat meals, and having people at the house, and being able to sing Smirot songs at the table and have other people tell their stories. It's really been disappointing and so difficult that for a year and a half, even when you're going to go outdoors to restaurants without masks, whatever the story might be, missing the chance to have hachnasat orchim and have people in the house. it's just a wonderful experience that I miss.
It is. It's a loss not to have that. And it's almost like we are living a small version of Mitzrayim, right? That we are in a time of straits in this period of COVID. And I hope, and I think for some people this is true, that the experience of escaping from this Mitzrayim of COVID means that we value community and value the human beings and being with human beings and doing hachnasat orchim, welcoming people into our house, and not just our closest friends. I mean, hopefully we get to a point soon where we can open our doors to more than just family or the people that we're already, kind of in the bubble with. And I know that most people actually are not being that protective anymore. And no one quite knows how to handle Omicron and in this moment. But there's still this, like, you and I are both in this level of protection. We both have lung issues and we both need to be very careful. And I do miss it, but I also hope that it's not just the rabbis anymore who value that welcoming, that building of community that happens around the table. There's something so powerful about gathering around a meal to build bridges and make friends and find our common humanity.
I'll tell you some of the best friends I've had, and some friendships that now are into 20 and 30 years, started with Shabbat, because being Orthodox in my case, I can't travel on Shabbat. And so if I'm going to be out of town, I need a place to stay for Shabbat where I won't have to drive. And in the same way, other Orthodox people coming through, we're in Orange County, and I don't want to say we're flyover country, but basically, I can't tell you how many times I've had a phone call. Hi, I was going from Los Angeles to San Diego, and I'm going to be stuck in Irvine for Shabbat, or I'm coming up from San Diego to LA. I'm going to be stuck for Shabbat. And I'm wondering, I'm Orthodox. I need a place to stay. I can't drive. Do you know where? And we would very often have a guest stay over our home for Shabbat. Come on over, be here at such and such time. You'll be with us for meals. You'll daven with us, and you'll sleep over. And by the way, do you know how to play Settlers of Catan? So anyway, we have people come, and you get to know people. Mm-hmm. And it's really been an experience where you hear people's stories, and after Shabbat they leave. If they don't, you help them understand this was a 25-hour invitation. It wasn't really a week. But the next thing you know, they're emailing or texting from Israel or from Minnesota to say, thank you so much for the Shabbat experience. We had a wonderful time. And then a year or two later, hey, by the way, I don't know whether you remember me from 2-3 years ago, but I've got to be back in Los Angeles. And this time I've got my scheduling and timing better. I don't need to be in Irvine, but if it would be okay with you and your wife, we'd love to spend Shabbat with you again in Irvine. And friendships develop. It's one of the great things of magic. I'm also a law professor. And when I've told my law students about this, that's where I really encounter a lot of non-Jewish people. They get blown away. You have people sleep over your house, people you barely know. And I explain that's like it's like a sacrament. It's like for Catholics, Mass. It's a thing. We have people over for Shabbat. Yeah.
It's that hachnasat orchim, that hospitality and welcoming. And you said when you have those strangers in your home, you connect over your stories. You hear other people's stories. And we were talking earlier about how stories convey meaning in a way that just telling does not teach. I think that one of my Torahs is actually challenging and inviting people to hear each other's stories, because particularly in a when society is polarized. Like we have such a hard time understanding someone who's on a different political spectrum, or feels differently about COVID and masking and vaccines than we do. And just people just get in their separate rooms, metaphorically speaking, and won't talk to each other. But if we hear each other's stories, it's not about policy or politics or which news network you watch. It's about human beings. And we can build those bridges and reconnect in that way. And the challenge of being online is finding ways to zoom in and hear each other's stories, to connect, as we're connecting right now, strangers who are inviting each other into our homes virtually, and hearing each other's stories and hearing each other's Torah. This has been such a treat to learn with you, and explore our Torah portion and the Seder that grew out of it this morning. Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same way. I'm thinking that you quickly went from someone I never met to one of my favorite people. And I'm really glad that we've had this opportunity, not only to talk a bit about Va'era, but to get to meet each other. Mm-hmm. So if I can just grab another moment, what's your basic story? Where did you grow up, and where did you go to school before you ended up in lovely Orange County, flyover territory between LA and San Diego?
Well, so I'm partially from Seal Beach, but mostly from rural Washington State. My parents, who are from Southern California, were hippies. So they disappeared into the wild of Washington. And when I was a kid in Washington, there were almost no Jews. We thought there was a Jewish community there. My parents were in touch with the Jewish community there. They moved to that community, and it turned out there were 48 Jewish families in a 2-hour radius, and the family holding the Jewish community together moved away when we moved in, which meant that my family held it together for the next 10 years. And in my high school of 2000, there was only one other Jewish student, and that was my sister. So very small Jewish population. And we did Shabbat every Friday and would have Shabbat dinner, and we would invite our friends over. And that was my childhood, some of the most powerful memories of my childhood. And the way we made friends was inviting people into our home for Shabbat, which was very countercultural in this very non-Jewish environment. People invited in only those who belonged to their church. And so looking back, we were kind of emissaries of Jews in that community, where there was, there's a lot of anti-Semitism, there was a lot of anti-everythingism, but the people were genuinely good people. They were also just learning from a kind of closed society. And I'm glad I don't live there anymore. I'm glad I am in Orange County. My parents are back in Seal Beach. My husband grew up in Seal Beach. So being back in Orange County feels like we have come home. We're now in Irvine. And as I said earlier, I'm at Temple Bat Yahm. So we feel like we're home, and it's nice to be in a community where there are other Jews. Although we are a minority, there's we're not in what I grew up in, as what my dad called the diaspora.
Wow, what a great story. Yeah, I ended up out here. I don't know if my New York accent comes out, because I take special efforts to put back the R's. New York is, we don't say R where it should be, like in New York with 33rd Street, but we make up for it by putting R's where they don't belong, like my sister Rhonda or my friend Linda, names like that. We always make, it all balances out. And what happened was, I actually, we made Aliyah in the mid-1980s. And the deal was we were going to live there forever and ever more. But unfortunately, the builder who was building our house went bankrupt with our life savings. And as a result of that, there was an unexpected change. It actually was more of a blow than even being punched in the face by Barbara Beale. And we ended up coming back to the US. I have 3 sisters. 2 sisters are in New York, and the other sister is in Tarzana. And I called her to tell her that, I'm coming back to America, and I don't know exactly what to do. I want to be a rabbi, and I'm starting at ground zero after 10 years. And she said, well, I've got these amazing friends in Woodland Hills. They're looking for a rabbi. one thing led to another, and they ended up hiring me to be the rabbi in Woodland Hills. So I came to the San Fernando Valley, practiced 3 years, and at that point, for financial reasons, because the builder's bankrupt really wiped us out financially, I had to take a detour and go to law school and become an attorney because I couldn't afford the finances of being an Orthodox rabbi. And I became a lawyer for about 10, 15 years and a law professor. And circumstances eventually allowed me to go back into the rabbinate. An opening came here in Irvine, and I've been in Orange County ever since. And then I get to meet people like you and Rabbi Gersh, Rabbi Mark, and thank you just for coming into our lives.
Mutual. It's what a journey, what a wandering
A
journey.
wandering
A little bit like Abraham's journey there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wandering you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, I'm glad for Orange County and for me that you've ended up here, and you never know what direction life will take you. And but your story is like the epitome of that Israeli joke. How do you have a small fortune in Israel? You move there with a large fortune. So I'm so sorry that happened to you, but I'm delighted that that you are here and that we got to meet this morning and study Torah together.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.